Hello? Hello? Ladies and gentlemen, please rise for the arrival of our official party, panelists, and executive director. Thank you. Please be seated. It is my pleasure to introduce a faculty member who inspires us all to partake in Captain Alden Partridge's idea of experiential learning. Speaking on behalf of all the students he educates and from personal experience, he serves as a valuable educator, mentor, and citizen soldier of our institution. Without further ado, I would like to welcome Dr. Travis Morris, the Executive Director of the Military Writers Symposium and the Director of the Peace and War Center.
So good evening. It's a pleasure to see all of you here this evening. And for those of you that just watched the video, you should recognize that warfare has changed. For those of you that are interested in being commissioned officers, working in any segment of security or the government or policy, this is the world in which we live in. And that video just gives you a short glimpse to not only what exists now, but the future in which you will not just inherit, but we expect you to lead in. And whether you recognize that artificial intelligence and robotics is part of the current landscape, that's the reality. That's why you're here. It doesn't matter if you're a biology major, criminal justice, mathematics, or political science. This is the world in which we currently live in, and this is why we have the Military Writers Symposium. So welcome to the 28th season of Norwich University's Military Writers Symposium. It is a pleasure to have each of you here. We've had a full day of programming, and hopefully some of you were able to attend some of today's sessions. And if you hadn't, we have sessions for you tomorrow as well. So it's my hope that you are able to not only just engage in today's sessions, but that you're able to recognize that you don't have to travel overseas to have new experiences and be exposed to new ideas. So before I introduce Norwich University's provost, I'd like to thank several people that make this event very special. So when I call your name, please stand and remain standing until all names are called. So President Anarumo, I know that he's here in the back taking care of things. Thank you, sir. We have Ambassador Van Ruben. Sir, would you please stand? The President and CEO of Pritzker Military Museum and Library, Dr. Kurowski Salter. Alex Kershaw, internationally renowned historian and Kobe Award Selection Committee Chair. Wesley Morgan, the 2022 Kobe Award recipient. And our Commandant, Bill McCullough. Let's give them all a round of applause. So events like this don't happen in a vacuum. There's multiple supporters. There's multiple different parts of our team that make this happen. And you just heard me introduce Dr. Salter, and I would also just like to thank our strong partnership with the Pritzker Military Museum and Library, and our deepest gratitude goes to the Pritzker Military Museum and Library in Chicago, who make this event possible, not only for the 28th season, for the previous season. So I'd also like to welcome you that are joining us via live stream. Welcome, and we hope you enjoy tonight's programming. So just a couple of housekeeping issues. Make sure your cell phones are off or on vibrate, one of the two. You'll notice that there are two microphones. So at the end of the program, you're going to hear the moderator call for students to ask questions. Please have your questions ready. You have a panel to my left that's some of the globe's leading thinkers on today's subject, so please engage them. So now it is my pleasure and honor to introduce Norwich University's Provost and Dean of the Faculty, Dr. Karen Gaines. Ma'am, the floor is yours.
Wow, welcome. What an outstanding event that we have planned for you tonight. The Military's Writers Symposium is a signature academic event of Norwich University and is led by Norwich University's Peace and War Center and supported by the Senator Patrick Leahy School of Cybersecurity and Advanced Computing. This symposium is the only program of its kind in existence at an American university, and we are proud to host this event. The Writing Symposium has brought some of the most prominent military, intelligence, and international affairs writers of our time right here to Central Vermont. It is designed to educate, enlighten, challenge, and inspire. The symposium is not only renowned for its relevance, but has never avoided hard issues as it focuses to advance our understanding of critical security issues. In 1996, the symposium was conceived by co-founders W.E.B. Griffin and Carlo D'Este, with the support of former Norwich President M.G. Russell Todd, USA retired, to bring influential writers to Norwich University. In the past, we've focused on cyber warfare, PTSD, the role of the media in war, war's effect on families, the impact of World War I, Iraq, environmental security, and the power struggle in the Arctic. This year, we devote our attention to the very important topic, robots rising, arming artificial intelligence. You have some of the globe's leading authorities on this subject sitting right here before you, who you will hear from shortly. It is my pleasure now to introduce tonight's moderator, Colonel Scott Nelson, U.S. Army retired. Before you get on stage, sir, I'm going to have to give a little background on your illustrious career. Scott Nelson currently serves as a senior advisor to the Director of Strategic Initiatives at the Cyber National Mission Force at Cyber Command. Scott served as the Director for Academic Engagement for the United States Cyber Command and Deputy Chief of Staff Operations, G3, for Army Cyber Command prior to his retirement after 32 years as a U.S. Army colonel. In addition to his military service, Scott held a position as Vice President for Norwich University's Applied Research Institute and Vice President of Strategic Initiatives for Security Set. Over his 32-year career, he has served in senior leadership positions in the Army, government, commercial, and academic sectors, Scott's expertise includes information warfare, public affairs, legislative and congressional affairs, and strategic planning. Please join me to give Colonel Nelson a Norwich warm welcome.
So thank you so much. It's a very distinct honor to be here tonight. And I want to start with a story. So you heard I wasn't a Norwich grad. And so I wanted to tell you a story about how you know that I'm not a Norwich grad. So when I first came to work for Norwich University Applied Research Institutes, my boss, Phil Sussman, walked in the office one day and said, "Boy, you really shined your shoes well today. Would you use a Snickers bar?" And so for tonight, I'm going to show you that I didn't shine my shoes so you can tell that I'm not a Norwich grad. That was a funnier story than when I said it earlier this morning. But I'm truly honored to be here tonight, and thank you, Travis, for the invitation, and all the distinguished faculty members I've worked for and with for the number of years, and continue to want to work with as we bring more and more stuff from U.S. Cyber Command to this university. So tonight, we want to talk about a couple things. First of all, we want to talk about artificial intelligence and the future of warfare. And really what we're going to try to set up for you tonight is, why do you care? As future Army officers, future Air Force officers, Marines, Naval officers, Coast Guard officers, or leaders in government. And the reason you care is because it's here today. Artificial intelligence is shaping the future of warfare. It's shaping warfare today. And we're using it, especially at Cyber Command, to understand our adversaries, and specifically what General Fogarty used to describe as the pseudo loop. So you've all heard about the OODA loop. The pseudo loop is sense, understand, decide, deliver, and assess. Artificial intelligence plays a role in all of that. So from a cyber perspective, you look at the data sets and as a cyber operator, the amount of information coming at you is unattainable from a perspective of human decision making. So artificial intelligence is the machine learning aspect of trying to make sense of what we're seeing and allow us to make decisions on how we're going to respond to that, and then assess our actions in the battlefield. I can tell you the adversaries are using this extensively as well. Our chief competitor, if you've read the national security strategy that came out today, we see China as a major competitor, and we're competing with them. And we also see the Russians, the Iranians, and North Koreans as major players in this battlefield as well. So with that said, this panel is going to go for about 50 minutes, and then we're going to have about 30 minutes for questions and answers. I really would like you to engage the experts we have on the stage tonight. And I'm not going to try to read their bios because they're too extensive, if you can read those in the room, but I would like to have them introduce themselves, and then we'll start into the conversation.
My name is August Cole, predominantly a writer, books like Ghost Fleet and Burn In that explore the future of conflict. As it relates to AI background, I've worked within the industry on futures for an AI company, and I'm currently also consulting on AI ethics for the Peace Research Institute of Oslo.
Yes, I'm Lyle Goldstein. I'm a China specialist. I also do some work on Russia, but China is my main focus, and China's military development. I'm faculty at Brown University and also director for Asia engagement at a think tank called Defense Priorities. Before that, I served for 20 years at U.S. Naval War College, so you'll forgive me if I often see strategy through a naval lens, but I'm so glad to be here.
Hi, I'm Sharon Weinberger. I'm the National Security Editor for the Wall Street Journal. I've spent the past 20 years either writing or editing on the intersection of science and technology and national security. Sort of my intersection with the world of robotics and AI is in 2017, I published Imagineers of War, which is a history of the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency, the Pentagon's R&D arm.
Hi, I'm Marco Close. I'm probably Well, I'm in charge of the fictional aspects of all of this. I'm supposed to make up all the stuff that makes people like these go, ooh, we need to implement that. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't, but I am the author of several military science fiction series. One is called Frontlines, and it's basically young man goes to war. One is called Palladium Wars, that's basically older man comes home from war. I have written about 12 or 13 books. That's my qualification to contribute to this. Is not in the AI field. Actually, when I was in the military, I actually was in the military, but I was not an officer. I was an E5 in the German military, and a long time ago. And it was so long ago that actually ties into this evening's events that the unit that I served in got put out of business because now there's drones doing the same job for much cheaper.
Excellent. Excellent. All right, so I'm going to start with the first question for August. So can you explain to us what is artificial intelligence and why is it important? And then a follow-up is, at this point, we look at artificial intelligence. It's been sort of largely in the realm, especially in general artificial intelligence, the realm of science fiction. So how are you seeing filmmakers and other creators sort of depict that and really sort of forecast what the future of artificial intelligence will be?
This is a great way to open the discussion tonight, in part because defining AI is actually quite hard to do, and I'm not a true AI expert or engineer in the way that someone who works day in and day out with these technologies does. But what you'd find if you gathered a group of AI true practitioners in a room was that there'd be a different definition for everyone. The way I look at it, the way that informs my writing on the creative side, but also on the policy side, is that I think about it as a family of software and hardware that increasingly allows almost human-like cognition capabilities. We're not there to the point where we have the sort of all-knowing, all-seeing, all-doing sorts of broad artificial intelligence that you might have seen in science fiction films that may say, rise up and try to eradicate humanity. But every single facet of your life, I guarantee you right now, is shaped by AI. Whether it's what you're watching next on YouTube tonight when you're done, that is selected by an AI algorithm. Whether it is a credit report, that is also guided by an AI algorithm. The list in the civilian world goes on and on. Similarly, on the military side, that's where a lot of that same driver of change is going to come from in shaping conflict itself. If you go back to the idea of social media and the power of AI, we're seeing emergent forms of warfare that can target truly the human cognition experience, right? How we think and feel. This is something that simply was not possible before, but now is with AI. The headlines that show us new robotic wingmen in the air, perhaps robotic drones that are helping with urban operations. Ukraine shows the value of AI for imagery analysis from space. We're beginning to kind of get in a superficial sense a real understanding, linking together some of these creative visions that the sci-fi world has offered forth in film and video games. But what it's much harder to do, though, than imagine is actually implement. And I think this is where one of the biggest gaps, and in your generation, you're going to start to see this actually come to fruition. Government works on programmatic budgets. It works with oversight. It works in the fairly mundane but crucial importance, crucially important facets of like our system in a civil military context. Yet that's also very, very difficult to acquire systems like software. That was true before AI. It's getting harder. Drones are going to be incredibly disruptive to the combat arms sector. We're going to see essentially the same sort of replacement pressures in the civilian world, really affecting fields like aviation, like infantry, et cetera. And so trying to kind of comprehend what that's going to look like from 2022 requires a lot of imagination. So I kind of think of this panel as an invitation to start on your terms, to use creativity, to use the content you're seeing, whether it's classic films like Terminator, which we'll talk about a bit to dispel, I think, some of the perils of using that killer robot paradigm, to the kinds of science fiction writing that some of us on this panel have done, but also really nesting the way you think about the future in fact, because when you're trying to understand the capabilities of some of these systems, which can seem almost magical when we're living sci-fi every day, tuning into reality actually can help us come up with a pretty clear picture of what's possible.
Anybody else want to answer? Take that on.
Well, it struck me, it was so much interesting discussion today, but and appreciated the reference to Terminator, of course, but I thought a very interesting point was made by Martha Wells in her discussion when she said, that she was grew up in the, I guess, the 1980s and was very much impacted by this movie, War Games. And to me, if we think of different kind of paradigms for how AI will impact the future of warfare, this idea that the robots rise up and try to destroy humanity, to me remains very far-fetched. But the possibility of uncontrolled rapid escalation occurring in the circumstance where both powers field very extensive AI capabilities is to me, that is truly scary. And as we look at great power competition, and it was mentioned that today the new national security strategy is out, so to me, I have that foremost in my mind, and it's of great concern.
Excellent. Okay, Dr. Goldstein, another question for you. So as you look at artificial intelligence, can you sort of talk to us a little bit about where that's being used in the military, and how is that sort of different in the real world from what was imagined, say, even back in the 80s with the Whopper at War Games?
Yeah, I think that, I mean, we are seeing a tremendous amount of course, of AI activity, and I mean, let's face it, I think the foremost impetus was, the campaigns in Iraq and Afghanistan, and all that taught us about what could be done with drones, and I think that had incredible implications around the world. I mean, I would say, again, putting my Navy hat on, if you don't mind, that the implementation is quite a bit slower than maybe some of us had imagined. Really, the foremost area where, beyond the aerial drones, where the Navy has been using drones for a decent amount of time, a decade or more, is really in hunting mines. But we're a long way, I still think, from really fielding robotic surface ships or robotic submarines, although they are playing around with various prototypes. So in a way, I think what we're seeing, just my quick take, is that as a matter of practice, that the drones become, at least for now, a kind of a supplement to the warfighter, but not the main warfighter.
Excellent. All right. Hey, Sharon, can you sort of talk to us a little bit about where you sort of see the risks when it comes to the integration of AI into warfare?
I think the risks are that we become overconfident in certain type of capabilities. If you look at where robotics and to a certain extent artificial intelligence has gone, it's not in the ways that I think we would have expected 20 years ago in terms of the first applications. I referenced earlier today when I spoke that back in 2002, Congress, in their defense authorization bill, said by 2020, a third of the Army's ground vehicles would be unmanned. It's basically about, I think, 0% now. I think we will, technology very rarely wins wars. It changes how we fight wars. So if you look, for instance, at the advent of armed drones, of the Predator, then followed by the Reaper, it didn't win wars, but it changed how we conducted them, that we were able to do targeted killings in countries and in places where we might have been more hesitant to do it with manned aircraft or other forms of strikes. So I think overconfidence in what artificial intelligence or robotics could provide, or what it will allow us to do, to me, I think that's the greatest danger.
Excellent. And Marco, can you give us a German perspective, and since you're the foreign officer up here, on where you see the German, the country or the military applying AI, and what's sort of a European view of artificial intelligence in warfare?
Well, the Germans know a thing or two about computers, and we've always tended to have a very high-tech army, but it's gotten. When I look at what's happened since I wore the uniform, and that was a while ago, I was going to say I kind of have uniform envy looking at the crowd here. I would have worn mine, but I haven't worn it in 30 years, and it must have shrunk in the wash or something because it doesn't quite fit anymore. But it just went from the time when I was serving to the time, and I've had plenty of friends who were on the various deployments in the last 10, 15 years. There was no lack of that for sure. But just seeing both in the US and in Germany, the technology that has seeped into the way we fight wars, that is, and amazing to see too, because it used to be, and it's still that way, because military procurement, what it is the technology that ends up in the force is usually not the cutting edge stuff, because it has to, you have to jump through so many hoops to get it, tested and approved and integrated and whatnot. But just seeing in the last 30 years how warfare completely has changed, just from the increased use of this smartly used high tech, to the point where now we have a conflict where the people that are fighting it to defend their home are using rack-grade commercial, drones that you can buy at Best Buy, and they 3D print, fins for anti-personnel grenades so they can actually drop them accurately from commercial-grade drones. And that is so much of a game changer on the battlefield. Like I pointed out, when I served, I was in a long-range reconnaissance company of the German army, and we had 3 companies, 1 per corps, so it wasn't a really big unit. But they're gone now, because the stuff that we can do with just rack-grade stuff that we can buy in the store, and most civilians don't even really know what's out there, like in what's being adapted for military use. But it changed. Like I said, my unit got disbanded because they rolled the capabilities into the Air Force's job. They can do it better with drones. It doesn't make any sense anymore to send 4 guys behind enemy lines for 80 miles and then have them dig a hole and report back what kind of vehicles come through the intersection. These days you do it with a drone, and you can do it much cheaper, and the drone is cheaper than the 4 guys that you have to train. And just seeing that, this was 30 years ago, and we basically went in terms of battlefield integration of communications. There's another big thing. We always had the radios, but now everything is networked, and there's no way like the best of 30 years ago would get absolutely stomped going up against what we can feel these days, just through the integrated battlefield communications and everything else that goes with it. I mean, it's been interesting to see this slow revolution of increased capability, and how much capability. Of course, we've gone off the deep end too with a few things that we get lost in. This toy probably has really awesome applicability for the battlefield, and then you put it into service and it's like, no, this is not what we need. But overall, it's been like I said, I wouldn't want to fight a modern unit with a same-sized unit from 30 years ago, no matter how good their training was, because the tech has just become too good. And the only problem with from the German angle that you asked, the way that NATO has been structured, the US has always been providing the heavy hitters, like, for example, the Navy. The US has the Blue Water Navy, and the German Navy is not a Blue Water Navy. It's a frigate navy that's meant to button up the Baltic and the North Sea, and it was laid out for the Cold War. And now the bigger challenge for the German military right now is not to integrate the technology, which they do very well. It's to find, to reassess the mission and have a kind of more distributed capability, because the US can do stuff that no other country in the world can, and it's becoming clear to some of our adversaries now too, because I read this Telegram thread of this despondent guy from this Russian mill blogger who said he's just now realized that the US is the only remaining superpower because we can stage a campaign halfway across the world. We have the logistics to do it, and it's what we do. And other armies, not naming any names here, other armies may have problems invading a neighbor that they're directly adjacent to, and that they've had a year worth to prepare for the campaign. So it's the technological advantage we have is definitely a game changer, but we need to not be complacent with it, and we need to make sure that we kind of, like the Germans are finding out now, there's a lot of capability that the US provides for NATO that the Germans don't have homebrew, and then they need to buy stuff that's not homebrew, because they got their mission stuff so tailored to a specific job that it's they have the best minesweepers in the world, but the minesweeper doesn't do you any good if you don't have a Blue Water Navy to back it up in case of conflict. So.
Excellent. All right, so this is for Sharon and for Lyle. Can you sort of talk to us a little bit about where our adversaries are going with artificial intelligence? some examples of application that you're seeing, China, Russia, et cetera, the big adversaries, and then sort of the future of what they're projecting.
Well, yes, it's quite a lot to speak to. There's a lot going on, and I will speak on this tomorrow morning, actually. If for those of you who will be there, I'll be speaking about Chinese naval unmanned platforms in particular. I do watch the Russian side, and I've been following the Ukraine war with great interest, of course, and I think my initial impression is that the Russians were very, very weak in drones at the outset, really, as we know, kind of face planted, if you will, but have been subsequently have discovered drones in a big way and begun to, implement a much more serious kind of drone tactics, including, interestingly, they seem to have acquired a huge number of Chinese drones, but through kind of third parties, but off the shelf seems to be quite effective for them in some ways. I would also point out, by the way, Russia is the only country that I know of to really fully integrate AI into the nuclear delivery system. That is this Poseidon UUV. I'll mention it tomorrow as well, but that's an unmanned system, a nuclear delivery system. Anyway, let me move to China, though. Although I also want to note that it's fascinating that we see in the Ukraine war, we see elaborate use of both Turkish and now Iranian drones. I mean, that in effect, that should tell us something quite interesting here. We might want to pick that point up later. But let's talk about China for a minute here quickly, and I'll just say that, China really has set itself up as an AI superpower, and I think there's something there, is my impression. Some people have tried to explain this, but I mean, part of it is if China's the kind of country and it has this the type of government they have, means if they put a singular focus on one area of technology, by golly, they will get there, and very quickly as well. They have the resources, they have the brain power. It's been brought up, they're able to make use of big data in ways perhaps that we're not. Now look, a lot of very disturbing things are going on in China related to the use of AI, like social control, social credit scores. We can talk about those things as well. So there's a very negative side. But I would encourage you to think also that China is capable of doing quite elaborate infrastructure projects like electric vehicles on a very large scale. So anyway, I will just leave you with this thought that I watch Chinese military news basically every day, and I will tell you the amount of the integration of drones into their operations at every level is truly extraordinary, and in some ways does surpass the U.S. military from what I can gather. So, I'll discuss some of that tomorrow. But we had better not underestimate China's efforts in this area. Thanks.
Sure.
Speak mostly to Russia, as I know it a little bit better than China, but even there. Sorry, I said I'll speak to. Thank you. I'll speak mostly to Russia, as I know their defense industry and what they've done much better than China. I would actually posit that Russia has been fairly limited in integrating AI, or probably what we would, of our standards of AI, into their systems. Quite the opposite. Russian defense industry and Russian weapons have been known for being analog. They've been slower to have digital cockpits for their helicopters, for their aircraft. They have, as we've seen now with sanctions, they have limited access to chips, where weapons have been seen in Ukraine, where there were chips. A lot of them are Western in origin. Russia doesn't have a Silicon Valley or an equivalent thereof. They've also been very focused on the export market for much of the past couple decades, where again, the focus has been on more basic technology, analog. So I don't know what I don't know. Certainly the more advanced air defense systems like the S-400, use advanced technology, but I just don't see any evidence, or even when you look at what's going on in Ukraine, that they have any sophisticated level of true AI in their systems. I would say overall they're behind. And as I said, the most obvious thing is where's Russia's Silicon Valley? For China, I have much more limited knowledge. I guess I would share what I know that some of my colleagues in the journalism world who have reported from China said. They said there's a tendency for the press, for the Western press in China, everything the U.S. does, we report on the flaws. Because we have a lot of access to U.S. weapon systems that go awry, to development programs that are behind schedule, over cost, that are oversold. Whereas when the Western press tends to report on China, everything works. Everything is as it's said. And part of it is simply we just have much less access to what's going on there. So I don't know. I know that there's been a lot of emphasis in China, and there's been a lot of good reporting on what they've done with data, with AI. But I don't know that we have any evidence, real evidence of what they've done with it, of how far ahead, how they've integrated it. Going back to the hack of the Office of Personnel Management, the huge database trove of information they have on U.S. government personnel, past and present. And one can certainly imagine things that you could do with that database on U.S. personnel with artificial intelligence, but we don't know.
Okay, excellent, thank you. All right, so this is for everybody on the panel, and I'll start with August. So as you start looking at the appearance of AI in the battlefield, can you sort of do a future cast on where do you see the application? Are we going to see AI application in medicine on the battlefield? Are we going to see that in intelligence? Certainly we're seeing that now. Are we going to see that in infantry fighting vehicles and close air support and fire support? Where do you sort of see things going on from an application perspective for these young officers for the future?
So one of the ways that I go about looking at what's ahead, say in the next 20 years, is by trying to kind of baseline where we are now. I feel like when you're forecasting or trying to create a credible understanding of what's coming down the pike, it's really important to understand the landscape of today. And where that points towards, in say kind of the late 2020s, early 2030s, is a force that hopefully has gotten out of its own bureaucratic way, so that, for example, the Air Force's current programs to develop autonomous wingmen are advancing along the lines of producing truly useful platforms, right? That aren't so expensive that nobody wants to employ them, but aren't so inexpensive that they don't have the capability to survive in a very contested airspace, for example. I think it's really worth watching what the U.S. Marine Corps is going to be doing as it shifts away from its heavy armor, from some of its fixed wing, to become the kind of force that can survive a close-in fight, a stand-in force, if you will, with China. Autonomy and AI is going to play a really important role for the Marine Corps of the late 2020s and early 2030s. That might be robotic, wheeled vehicles that carry anti-ship missiles that don't actually need to be driven by a Marine. It might mean that the sensor networks or the data that they're tapping into when they're deployed are managed and fused together by artificial intelligence systems. If you could think about it this way, today, and we were talking earlier about this idea of the lack of synergy between, say, like an intelligence analyst and, say, a fires company or, an infantry unit. Imagine if, the intelligence analysts had their own kinetic capability, right? And that was an autonomous robotic force. Similarly, imagine if an infantry platoon had its own on-site exploitation that was a mix of the kinds of models that we're seeing in the commercial world today that can understand and process language no matter which nation's tongue it's in, and be able to assess and sift and sort and share at the sort of speed that only special operations forces did at the most elite level 5 to 10 years ago. I think those kinds of paradigm shifts are coming, and they're going to be, again, I think, quite transformational if we can kind of get out of our own bureaucratic way. I don't think there are the ethical issues that a lot of people throw up in this kind of as a roadblock, because many of the laws of armed conflict or international humanitarian law can be applied in the instances for these sorts of systems. Now, U.S. policy, of course, has always been pretty close to hewing to this notion that there will always be a human, in or on the loop. But the reality is that's not going to survive contact, right, with a force like, China's going to put forth in the Pacific. The threat environment, the speed of warfare, of being able to use this OODA or SUDA loop, be able to take information, orient, decide, and act. A human is only going to slow that down. And you're seeing glimpses of this in the cyber domain, right? You can't put people in between some of these, threat actors and the target because it's going to be simply too slow to move at machine speed. And so that's going to be a really big challenge, I think, cognitively, of course, but offers a lot of opportunity for the kind of people who really see that as an opportunity to thrive and come up with real innovation.
Wow.
I think, well, I might just comment on the China side a little bit more. I am seeing some degree of innovation here, which, again, we'll get in a little bit more tomorrow morning, but, just to give an example, we expect, if they go forward with a Taiwan scenario, that this would, to a large degree be spearheaded by airborne or heliborne assault. And of course, one of the big problems with units like that is they're not heavily armed, and they may run short on supplies very quickly. So they have combat power, but it's they can become isolated. So the idea is to use large drones to support these, to fly in, literally pallets of ammunition and so forth. So that's just one of the ways I think that China is kind of creatively thinking about how to use AI in the Taiwan context. The Navy is going ahead, I would say quite robustly with some platforms already. They have a long endurance surface vessel, which I think has a radius of something like 8,000 or 10,000 miles. So that's interesting. Some kind of, let's say we have a start on robotic submarines also. I think there's systems called the Orca and Snakehead I actually saw with my own eyes in Newport not that long ago. Believe me, the Chinese are watching this very closely, and as I'll discuss tomorrow, they have their own versions of these. But I would also raise, we were talking about the risks here, and I would just raise something that I see which is a little disturbing, is that we, in the United States, one reason we were quite successful with our implementation, if you will, implementing this drone revolution, was that it was kind of a low threat environment in a sense. You could fly drones easily all over Iraq and Afghanistan because they had no air defense, seriously, and no air force to speak of. So I guess what I'm trying to say is I think we have to be very concerned that a lot of these drones, for example, when I think of this surface vessel that the U.S. Navy is considering fielding in large numbers, it doesn't have any air defense at all. So I'm just saying that we, when you're talking about peer-to-peer competitors or a great power war, that's something altogether different, and drones would play a very different role, and we have to think that all through.
Sorry, is the question on the risks?
No,
Sorry, I lost the train. I was listening to the speakers so much, I lost the train of the original question.
So where do you see the impact of artificial intelligence in application of military power? So medicine, intelligence, et cetera. What things are you seeing on the battlefield now?
I think intelligence is where we've seen it the furthest. I have to admit, I remember, I'm better on history than the future. I remember sort of in the, around 2009 or maybe 2010, going to look at state of the art in facial recognition. And it was really pretty poor. And I thought at the time, like, this is just, it's not going anywhere. And I was dead wrong. I think in things like biometrics, artificial intelligence, pattern recognition, targeting, these are things that computers and artificial intelligence do very, very well. I think in intelligence, which is of course then applied to military applications, is where it's going to make, it has made and probably will continue to make the biggest gains.
I think the immediate future, I don't think, and I know that, when you see the videos of the cool robots, the Boston Dynamics robots, and people are like, oh, strap a machine gun to that. And I think we're going to see, in terms of the near future, we're going to see leaps in integration and force multiplication and enhancing capabilities like we are doing now, only much more so because the technology is getting better year over year. I don't think that, like personally, as an old infantry guy, I don't think we're going to see autonomous robots with machine guns. Like we don't trust our Teslas to take left turns reliably without killing people. And we're not going to strap a machine gun to one of those cute little Boston. Well, we've done it already. But the difference being this whole thing that you were talking about, that there always has to be a person in the loop. I don't think we're going to have. We're going to see unmanned aircraft in the Air Force long before we see fully autonomous combat vehicles in the Army, precisely because of that. Because there's just too much still, as good as AI has gotten, and it's showing again my infantry bias here, but it's when I think about just from that perspective, like when you have an armed drone, you still have somebody there who signs off on the target and who actually works the trigger, but I don't think that we're going to have. Barring some quantum leaps in the next 10 or 20 years, but the ethical and the technological and the operational restrictions that you have when you let a robot make its own decisions on who it's going to shoot and who it's not going to shoot, there's just too much involved that I think is beyond the capacity of current AI, of the capabilities to understand, like for example, the nuance in an infantry fight where you are out on patrol and everything looks normal, but you've got that tingly feeling in the back of your head that says something's fishy, that you can't teach an AI. Like you can not the current generation of AI. You can allow for a whole bunch of what-if scenarios, but it's an algorithm. It's like if-then. It's not. You can't teach it those non-tangibles. And I also think that strictly from a ethical standpoint, this is going to be a hard nut to crack for anybody who wants to have like fully autonomous combat, AI, is also the lack of accountability for the use of force, because it's easy to. Sometimes it's not so easy, but generally, when somebody pulls the trigger on the wrong target, you can track it back. If you have two state actors or a state actor fighting a non-state actor, and they all use off-the-shelf drones and arm them with lethal weaponry, and say in 10, 15 years you have the capability for them to pick out you have that capability already, you are just not using it, that they pick out their own targets. How do you have absolute deniability there, wasn't our drone, wasn't our weapons, and you don't have accountability, an ability to trace it back to, whatever military used it or whatever operator used it. If it gets, I'm just thinking, like for example, Ukraine, like they're using drones that are off the shelf, that you can buy, like I said, at Best Buy or whatever. But imagine if we had a non-state actor who used those in war, where you can't track back where it came from, and you can't. It's just, I can see some countries doing it, I just don't see the US doing it because of all the ethical implications that come with it. So in the next 15 or 20 years or so, we're not going to see fully autonomous combat AI, but we are going to see, like I said, I think we're going to see unmanned aircraft, combat aircraft, long before we see, AI infantry.
Excellent. All right, so I'm going to throw you all a little bit of a curveball here, because this is a question I didn't put on the sheet. But we have journalists and authors up here. So what I'd like you to do is put yourself to 2030. You are a brand new second lieutenant or an ensign. Pick your service that you want to describe, and describe the tools and the capabilities you're employing on the battlefield from an AI perspective, or an AI-enabled perspective, in whatever branch you want to choose. You want to be a military intelligence officer, you want to be a doctor, et cetera. But tell us a short story about how that looks. August, we'll start with you, since you tell stories like that all the time.
All right, this is like a writing exercise here, huh? Well, I'll pull the example I started to talk about earlier about the future, Marine force in the Pacific, and you can imagine a small unit of let's say 15 Marines who are, in the second or first island chain, perhaps being resupplied by the same sorts of autonomous surface or undersea vessels that you might today use for reconnaissance, but really have to go after those kind of core military problems of like, how do you sustain a force? How do you get them ammunition? How do you get them batteries? Similarly, their situational awareness, like how do they know what's going on in an environment that may have a lot of jamming, a lot of contested challenges. And so they're going to be using software that's effectively, AI driven to be able to assess at any given time from the panoply of data that they can extract, which is the most valuable, which is the most accurate. One of the biggest challenges is that we don't really have a good language to communicate with machines or even among ourselves about the fidelity of information that comes from an AI type system. This is a really big design challenge, one I find really interesting, in figuring out how to kind of communicate trust and confidence. Again, machine to machine, but also machine to human, human to machine. Similarly, you can imagine, say back home in San Diego, those Marines and their families or their loved ones or their peers are being bombarded, right, by the kinds of information campaigns that are targeting them, those people in the States on the domestic side, at a very core level, at an emotional level that's different than the sort of propaganda that we're used to seeing in wartime that an adversary might employ, but rather using many of the same capabilities and technologies today that end up promoting extremism through social media, radicalizing individuals. Those are going to be modified to a point and used by adversaries to leverage many of those same AI algorithms on the home front. So on that threat side too, we have to think about some of these kind of novel use cases and what that does for readiness, what that does for the sense of a deployed force. I think that's really crucial to kind of think holistically about those aspects.
Ensign Goldstein?
Yeah, I might have to jump on that train there, considering, what maybe how the Marines or naval units out there in the Western Pacific, the situation they might face. I guess I would start by saying that it would be an incredibly stressing environment, and beyond the issue of how AI could serve their needs and keep them functioning as a combat unit. I think as a commander there, the biggest stress, of course, would be trying to mitigate the enemy's AI-enabled capability. And here I would underline I'm very concerned that geography is very favorable to China, right? This is for them a kind of, if you will, fight in their front yard, but for us it's 8,000 miles away, depending on how you measure. So I am concerned that we like these kind of whiz-bang solutions, but the reality is that the toughest job for this AI-enabled commander may just be kind of resilience, fighting through surprise, deception. I would think one of the biggest problems, as we look at the drone threat going forward, a lot of the Chinese drones, I think, absolutely are going to be aimed at spoofing your air defenses and whatnot by overwhelming them, with swarms and so forth. So I think one of the biggest problems for our commanders going forward will be how to prevent your side from Winchestering, meaning like we just used all our ammo on things that were not real. So now we have nothing left for the real battle. So another thing I think that's going to be foremost in their minds of those commanders, Marines, Army, whatever out there will be distributed warfare, in the sense of I think drones are giving more information to both sides, to the point that these networks, especially logistics networks, are newly vulnerable, so that distributing your force will be huge. And then last thing I'll say, I think I can imagine this commander would also have a big headache, because I think levels of command also get blurred a lot when everything is, when you have such information available throughout the hierarchy, so that I think you're going to have some major command confusion and also civil military discord, resulting from that, all those hard decisions that that are maybe way out in the Western Pacific, but the Pentagon has a video feed and has a say. Thanks.
Senator Weinstein. Weinberger, sorry.
Again, it's like unmuting yourself on Zoom after 2.5 years. So I feel like journalists are always in the worst position to predict the future, and the few times I have, I am completely wrong, to include the invasion of Ukraine. So I guess I always tend to look towards the past because it does give us indications of what may happen. So one of the things, if we look at revolutions, in technology, we've talked a lot about drones. Well, one of the things that we've learned about drones is they don't just give us an advantage, but the quick commercialization and proliferation of technology gives the Houthis in Yemen an advantage. Iran is building fleets of drones. Iran is providing drones to Russia. It's a capability now that is available both to very developed countries and some rather undeveloped ones. So I guess if I were to make any prediction about AI, it would be that we shouldn't presume that we will have a significant advantage the way we think we might as a superpower. Of course, we have advantages in drones, we have advantages across technology, but I think we have to assume that commercial availability of technology will give some of these same advantages to our adversaries. So I don't know what that will mean in 2030, and I would be hesitant to predict. I'll be wrong, but if I'm going to predict something, it would be that we won't have that advantage as much as we might think and as much as we have in other areas.
Well, first of all, if I find myself as a second lieutenant in 2030 somewhere in the Pacific, something has gone terribly wrong with my writing career. But I think that what we're going to see is precisely what you said, Sharon, is that the people that are in competition with us that cannot, basically, if it's a stand-up fight, even if it's halfway across the world, like, Chinese with Taiwan or whatever, it's going to be a tough nut to crack for them if we start going all in because, we have capabilities that they don't, and the technological gap is shrinking, but it's still hugely in our favor. What's going to happen is in the next decade or so is that, especially after seeing what's going on in Ukraine, is that a lot of these non-state actors and a lot of these state actors that are basically, belligerent or opposing us, will use that the increased capability of AI and then the increased availability of this off-the-shelf technology that is militarily useful to try to close the gap in ways that we are trying to anticipate, but we probably won't with some of these things until they happen, is when they try to negate our advantages, with integrated communications, with supply, with everything. There's a lot that you can do with, the AI capabilities that we have now, and we've seen this in previous conflicts, and we've seen this also in the non-military political arena, that you can get a lot of bang for your buck. You can spend $60 million on a new supply ship, or you can spend $2 million on staffing a server room full of 200 guys who are going all in on cyber warfare on your country. So we're going to see a lot of that going on, increased as the technology gets better, that our opponents are basically going to use the capabilities of the hardware and the software to negate our advantages as much as they can. And it will come, there's stuff that is coming out in that we don't, that I'm sure there's a lot that we do anticipate, but there's a lot that we don't anticipate yet that we're only going to find out on the battlefield, like if things really heat up with China, for example.
Oh yeah, I wanted to interject that I really feel strongly we need to probably shelve the idea that we are going to have superiority or even technological superiority over China in a battlefield fight. We may be superior in certain respects, and on some platforms I think we retain superiority, fortunately, but on many we do not. And just very quickly, anti-ship cruise missile. The YJ-18 is superior to anything we have in our fleet. They have something called the anti-ship ballistic missile. We don't have one. I think we wish we did. China has a deployed hypersonic weapon. We do not. I just finished a study of their top-line surface combatant. It's probably superior to our top-line surface combatant. So, now maybe those are exceptions that prove the rule, but folks, anti-ship, if you're in a naval fight with China, anti-ship cruise missiles are pretty important. It's not a minor capability.
All right. So we're going to transition to asking questions, but I wanted to sort of wrap this all up with a sort of description of what I've gotten and learned from Lieutenant General Fogarty when I was one of his deputy G3s at our cyber. And as I started with this idea of the pseudo loop, so understand that AI is going to be critically important, especially for military intelligence and cyber and information operations as we go forward. So as we start sensing a lot more information, so you're going to have tons and tons of data coming at you as a brand new lieutenant or ensign out there in the field. How do you make sense of it? How do you understand what's coming at you first? So as we talked about drone swarms and all these other adversaries or things coming at you, how do you sense that first before the adversary does? The second then is understand. How does AI enable your ability to understand what's really going on, right? Could it be an information strategy against our families and our service members back in home station, or could it be something that's going on where artificial intelligence is enabling ISR going forward to see what's out in front of us in the deep fight? And the next thing is then, as we transition from sense, understand, how do we then make decisions on all that information? So AI will enable decision making going forward as well in a much faster pace, because one of the things, if you've listened to anything from the ASUA in the last couple days, every single general officer's talked about tempo and mass and precision. So AI plays a massive role in all of that as we go forward for decision making and enabling decision making. And then we deliver a solution. How do we assess that? So if it's a cyber attack, if it's a offensive cyber operation, if it's an information operation, if it's precision fires, how do we assess the effect we've had? And the AI plays in that battle damage assessment as well. So all of this is going to impact your career. And I would have told you as a second lieutenant right before Desert Storm kicked off that I wouldn't experience the career I have had. I guarantee you'll have this experience going forward and in a much faster rate than what we have seen in our lifetimes here so far. So with that said, I'd like to open the floor to questions. I would ask you to come to the microphones, identify your name, your rank. If you want to identify your specific unit, you can, and then ask your question, please.
Can y'all hear me? No? All right.
Okay. Sir, the first question.
All right. Can y'all hear me? No? All right. I'll be louder. Good evening. My name is Cadet Staff Sergeant Hartzo from Alpha Company. And one of my questions for y'all is that when y'all were speaking, you were talking more so about the combat arms side of AI. I was wondering if some of y'all can expand the idea of logistical support AI.
Yeah, I'll speak to that. I think one of the bigger challenges in the narrative and the stories we tell about AI is that to your point, they tend to dominate this question of the systems that we associate with combat arms. But in fact, even in the near term, I think many of the more disruptive or truly powerful capabilities could be very much around creating greater efficiency with systems that are assessing who gets what when, whether it's personnel, whether it's materiel. Similarly, for officers who are managing an incredibly complex set of tasks, the amount of paperwork that begins to mount as you rise and are promoted, that seems like a really great way with artificial intelligence to address some of those profound pain points for particularly mid-grade officers who may be facing the choice of, do I want to stay and serve or deal with more headaches? Or can I, in fact, use some of these systems to address some of the abiding challenges of leadership that have less to do with actual mission effectiveness, more just about the way that bureaucracy works. So I think that's a really crucial question, and there's a lot of opportunities there to make a meaningful difference, saving money, time, and people's pain. I don't know if you.
Yeah, great question. I would just comment quickly. Looking at Chinese military media, I mean, it is stunning how much they are convinced of the key role of logistics, obviously, but AI as an important integrating function. I mean, if you think about a Taiwan scenario, for example, you got to move a lot of stuff, right? And you got to move it very fast, and you got to move it in a kind of stealthy way. And so, yes, they have alighted on the fact that AI can do this a lot better than humans. So I think if we see this unfold, that will be a critical part. And undoubtedly, they're betting on their logistics advantage, right? Their logistics train is so much simpler than ours if the fight is in their backyard.
Hi, my name's Cameron Vella. I'm a residential advisor on the civilian side, so I don't have a rank in the Corps. But I am a cybersecurity major with a pursuing law school once I graduate from here. And I was wondering, could AI and or robots in the future affect the way law is processed? And if someone were to use an AI in some sort of way, whether that's through the news, spreading false information that could potentially hurt someone? And if so, what way could we help prevent that change and or help adapt to it, if you had any advice on that?
I'll take the AI and law question. The second book that I wrote, Burn In, the protagonist is an FBI agent, but her husband is a lawyer who was on track to become a partner at a kind of white shoe law firm whose job was essentially replaced by an algorithm. And I think the reason why we chose that fate for that character was that it's emblematic of the services economy in the U.S., which is preponderance of our economic activity, is incredibly disruptible with AI. So whether it's discovery, for example, document processing, that is a task that AI today already is handling in the legal world and will continue to do more of. So there's one vision of it, which is our somewhat dystopian one, which is it's much cheaper for a law firm to pay X amount a year for a software capability, maybe even a cloud service, versus paying someone mid six figures cash for their time. The other way to think about that, though, is that the lawyer of the future is going to have to work with AI, just like writers are going to have to learn how to use large language models to help with productivity or editing or creativity, or visual artists are increasingly using AI engines to storyboard. That's sort of the tension I see in some of these, but law especially seems very disruptible with AI. There's already a lot of activity there.
Thank you.
Okay. Next question.
Hi, I'm Cadet Dylan Paulette. I'm a first lieutenant in the Corps. I just had a question. You were speaking what seemed to be Marine Corps Force Design 2030. How up to speed would you say right now that the military in general is with counter-UAS systems and training for any infantry unit?
Not.
Although, National Training Center just completed like 4 weeks ago a massive integration of, kind of quadcopter type capabilities in a swarming pattern to test this, right, in an offensive sense. And the fact that that's occurring and that failure is becoming more and more an option, so to speak, in these kinds of exercises is actually heartening. There are programs of record for counter-UAS in different branches, even within the services, but I don't think we've seen anything quite scale yet. And this is kind of one of the abiding challenges with AI as well. Many of the best systems are going to be small and somewhat inexpensive, again, based on that kind of consumer model. That's often hard for our defense industrial complex to really push forward, services to buy a new Congress to authorize and appropriations for, et cetera, or appropriate. But I think you are seeing actually that take shape, and many of the kind of counter-IED mission has switched over to counter-UAS, and you're going to see that evolve further. Whether it's like Eagles that attack drones, or whether it's kind of more electronic warfare oriented, you'll probably see a lot of different systems based on the theater emerge.
Next question.
Good evening. My name is Gabriel Williams. I'm a second lieutenant in Delta Company. So my question kind of falls around the same track that the previous cadet spoke on, which is training, right? So from a military force planning perspective, what is our department doing? What is NATO doing to integrate more proficient training platforms to train the warfighter on the integration of AI at the combat level? So we talk about combat capabilities in C4ISR, or we're talking about cyber or electromagnetic warfare. What is the DoD doing? How do we codify that into our training process to make sure that our warfighters properly understand the capabilities of AI and how it integrates directly to the mission in the operational environment?
So I'll start with a little bit on the cyber side, since you asked on cyber. So one of the things that we're seeing as a significant change and the leveraging AI, especially for cyber defense, is the ability to look at big data sets, and we're talking big data sets, to identify anomalies in the data, right? So using humans is just not possible. There's just way too much data. So now artificial intelligence and machine learning comes in. It can start identifying those patterns and trends inside the data that are going after threats. And so it's critically important that we're embracing those technologies coming in. The second part of that question is also looking at the mis and disinformation aspect. And August and I had a conversation here recently about this, and he's very concerned about cognitive intelligence or cognitive operations. But one of the things that, as an information operations officer for 22 years, has been a challenge for me is the lack of understanding the adversary's actions inside the information environment and our ability to assess our actions in the information environment if that even had an impact. So I see AI playing a major role there as well going forward. And it just matters where the department really wants to invest. The challenge remains, are we investing in major weapon systems, or are we investing in sort of smaller capabilities that have a much larger impact, in my opinion? And so it really comes down to a leadership issue when it comes to looking at the future.
I'll just tail on to that. It's happening right now, but scaling is hard and it takes a long time. But I think what you'll find is that there are small numbers of people who are pushing really big ideas that are starting to take shape, because reform has to happen from top down, right? But also kind of buy-in at the bottom, and then hopefully the middle gets in line. But you're seeing, from the Deputy Secretary of Defense and the AI strategy, the national security strategy just out, will be followed hopefully soon by a new AI strategy. I think that's going to help drive a lot of that in getting kind of more programmatic approaches. But fundamentally, this is a leadership challenge for the next generation of junior officers, is ensuring that you have an understanding yourselves that your troops, your Marines, your sailors, your airmen are also coming along with you, because that's going to be determining so much of their career into the future.
From what I've seen in the Navy, and I can say I no longer work for the Navy now, so I can maybe speak a little more freely on this, but it seems to me there were some major gaps in training. And, this has been in the press, I think, as well. And, well, I do think that the Navy has put too high a priority on kind of partner engagements, which, have a certain role, but also we have trouble training for the high-end fight when we're operating with navies that are like, almost the size of a Coast Guard or something like that. So, I mean, I think this is a real problem. And this, as we start the Navy seriously considers fielding, major, robotic submarines and so forth. It's a huge doctrinal and training challenge, and to me, I think this came up in earlier sessions today, but the risk of putting a substantial amount of your force in AI platforms, big robots basically, that are untested, is very, that's a very hard decision to make.
Good evening. My name is Sean Bassey, a senior in political science and a private in the Corps. This is a question for the entire board, but I wanted to ask about your opinion in the future development of the international order regarding morals and ethics in the utilization of AI warfare, or AI in warfare. For context, in this board, of course, we talked about the utilization and unlikely outcome of full AI warfare in the sense of like Terminators walking down the street, just because there's a lot of moral and ethical dilemmas with that. However, we also see the development of these very same systems in the case of Iranian drone swarms being utilized in Ukraine by Russian forces in a recent suicide attack on a Ukrainian armored brigade headquarters, North Korean exploitation of cyber warfare on US government personnel data, and the increasing usage of arguably rogue states not adhering to a moral or ethical code in utilizing AI in warfare. And so, considering these factors, how can you, or what could you recommend to future officers or future leaders, political, civil, what have you, in helping to begin limit, in the same way we have limited the usage of nuclear weapons, usage of AI in future warfare?
I don't know that we're at a point where we're going to be able to put the brakes on the use of AI in warfare at a global level. Individual nations may be able to make that choice. Maybe even within a community like the EU or NATO may even have its own prescribed limits. What I think it is a facet to your question, which is, if an adversary is using unrestricted, killbots or terminators or whatever, does that by necessity require a like, degradation in our own standards, right, in our own kind of conduct? And I don't think it does. I mean, these are choices that have been faced for a long time when it's, the 20th century is, escalating technologies for destructive power. What I would say, though, is that when you look back at World War I and unrestricted submarine warfare, when you look at World War II and the targeted bombing of industrial and civilian cities, you have seen increasingly indiscriminate, targeting of civilians with more advanced, weaponry. The worry, I think, with AI is similar, right? And I think it's right to be extra vigilant and to have a conversation now about what are the ethical norms. Is it a virtue ethics approach? Like, do we try to kind of set an ideal, right, that we can adhere to? And what do we have existing in our current code? Some of the ways that I think the civilian tech sector is using AI is incredibly unethical already, right? And these are driving some of those valuable companies in the world. That should be worrying as much as whether we're going to modify the UCMJ or international humanitarian law. So in many ways, the next generation of military leadership has to make that incumbent on them, because these technologies are going to influence what they can or cannot do at a tactical level, or the choices because of this kind of great power context we're talking about, where autonomy at the leader level, like, you may not be able to reach back to a JAG, right, or the orders that you were receiving don't fit the operation as it actually unfolds, so you have to make a decision. So I actually think investing time in understanding the ethics around warfare is just as crucial as understanding the technology itself. And I say this as someone who has an interest in ethics, and I think it's really important.
Yeah, I want to add something, stealing something from a colleague. There's been so much focus on the idea of a terminator and that being sort of the test case for ethics and morality. And there's a friend of mine, Patrick McCray at the University of Santa Barbara, and he calls these wishful worries. The best indication to me of where the military is going is sometimes where it says it's going. I have not seen anybody advocating for taking the man out of the loop, for creating Terminator-style robots. So when we talk about ethics, hopefully it takes, I don't think what we're seeing, some of the examples you gave of other countries ignoring the rules of war, that's not an AI issue, that's a rules of war issue, and those are going to be the same things that we have to grapple with, whether it's AI or not AI.
Good evening. My name is Cadet Major Benjamin Powers. I'm an electrical and computer engineering major. My question is mainly for Dr. Goldstein. With your time working at the Naval War College, I'm sure you know the importance of wargaming and winning the fight before the fight happens. I was wondering if you think artificial intelligence can play a role in being able to profile certain naval commanders and understanding their forces and being able to create a hyper-accurate profile of that commander that we can then wargame against.
Well, yeah, thank you very much. Naval War College is kind of famous for holding this series of games in the interwar period, these War Plan Orange, a series of games where they claim to, I think rightly, predict basically all aspects of the war in the Pacific, and that led to huge success. And yeah, I take wargaming very seriously in Newport, as you imply. Well, I think your idea has some promise. I know some work was done in Newport on psychological profiling of adversary leaders and so forth. But yeah, I think I will say, you know, I tend to, how to put it, I study red more than blue, you know, if you can understand. So I watch what China's doing, and they have taken a very deep interest in how AI can help not just tactics and operations, but actually strategy. And, you know, that's kind of a leap, really. I mean, we kind of joke about the IBM defeating the human at chess, but you know, could you imagine a computer essentially deciding where the main thrust of the Taiwan invasion goes? I mean, that seems kind of far-fetched, but that is literally what they're talking about, if you can imagine. So, thank you.
Good evening. My name is Nicholas Anthony Chavarden, and I'm a construction management major here at Norwich. So it's been depicted in many movies and books where countries or organizations rely so much on AI and technology where they rely on it too much, and then there's an electromagnetic attack or cyber attacks that are so frequent and so effective that those technologies are no longer useful and they result back to analog or mechanical systems. Do you think countries should invest in both those analog and mechanical systems with the AI, or completely forget about them?
I'm going to jump right in front of that one because Ghost Fleet is, you know, novel where we thought about conflict with China. This was one of the really critical things we were trying to understand, is sort of where does technological hubris get you into trouble that you're so over-reliant on, say, you know, GPS. And this is, again, a book from 7-8 years ago, right? So it's a little bit different point of view of what we know now. My hope is that you can, you know, train to a technological capability, but understand just as well how to operate without it, either, you know, temporarily or potentially permanently. So that might be teaching land navigation, you know, for some part of your naval forces to know celestial navigation, to think through different kinds of communication that don't require satellites, you know, because you're going to lose those most likely and not replenish them as quickly as you want. I think, you know, the Ukraine conflict exposes a bit this duality where, you know, one boot is in the early 20th century, one boot is firmly in the 21st. You know, you have trench warfare, but also, you know, hobby drones that are conducting, you know, extremely precise strikes guided by, you know, wizard level electronic warfare, right? And I think that tension is really important to think about in envisioning what's ahead. So I would very much focus on the fundamentals too.
Yeah, I was just at a conference with Space Command, and we were debating, you know, which side in a U.S.-China conflict has more incentive to, you know, take out the satellites. And, you know, I found myself arguing that actually it may well be the U.S. side that has the incentive to eventually to take it to that level, because, you know, China may be able to target our forces better with their satellites. So, yeah, I can't say enough. I think it's a very important question, and one of my takeaways from this whole discussion is really that future military leaders and all leaders, you know, just have to have this focus on resilience, really, as a way. And I hope, I do think both U.S. and Chinese forces are basically actively preparing for that. They've all read Ghost Fleet, as it should.
Thank you.
So unfortunately, this could be the last question because we're running short on time. So you got the last question.
To bend over here, but good evening. My name is Cadet Major Cameron Arnold. My question really comes from an infantry point of view. We always hear, mostly in popular media, the talk of the eventual overthrow or overhaul of infantry units and the replacement of AI. And while I understand we're not exactly on the cusp of infantrymen that, you know, AI infantrymen carrying machine guns and mortars and things like that, how imminent is the eventual downsizing or downgrading of infantry units by AI?
I would say it's imminent. I think it's going to be about 10, 15, 20 years, but I think it's going to be more gradual. Like, there won't be autonomous infantry units of robot soldiers. There will be enhancement of capability, like, for example, you know, what they did with the, they trialed a few of these cute little robot dogs for cargo carrying, and I can see how integrating combat AI with a live squad takes a lot of, stuff that you usually use manpower for. Like, for example, transporting a mortar, you can divide it up between 4 guys, or you can strap it to one of those robot dogs, and and it takes, if the AI-driven tech can supplement, human capability, and it can enhance capability, but I think we're quite a far away from completely replacing it, because there's so much that goes on the modern battlefield that, as of yet, like I said before, that you cannot teach an AI yet. We may get there, but I don't see it happening in the next decade or two.
I keep waiting for those videos of dancing dogs and robots to do something more than that. I actually agree. I mean, I think they're going to supplement infantry units, but the question you have to ask for anything is, it's not just enough to replace a human being. It's a question of what can they do it better? And what is better? Is it cheaper? Is it more efficient? Is it more replaceable? So I'm a horrible forecaster, but I would say to actually look at what are the types of tasks, of things that infantry units do, what are the things that could be replaced, that would be better replaced by robots, and that at least gives you an indication. I think it's going to be a long time, if ever, before they're replaced totally.
I'll just jump in, with my kind of futurist hat, which is, erring a little on the side of sci-fi, but it's rooted in the real world. So, if we posit that, AI and robotics is going to transform the economy and change fundamentally the labor force. So a country in Europe that has really strong social entitlements is going to have to spend more and more money on taking care of a population that has less and less work. So does their standing army become a bill payer, right? But they still need a deterrent capability. Can you create a robotic force that you can stick in a mountainside or a cave and break out when hostilities are urgent, or do you, turn your surface ships into, unmanned systems, et cetera? So the answer may depend by country, by alliance, et cetera. And I think similarly, the U.S. is not going to be immune from some of those same pressures, and that the traditions of having a force that is predominantly, human may be maintained for, again, political reasons, for traditional ones. And I think that we have to be open to the fact that changes outside of the field of warfare may drive some of that for structural and economic reasons. Economics is a huge driver, of course, in what is becoming everyday AI already, because it creates incredible wealth. And similarly, it's going to be incredibly disruptive, I think, when it comes to public goods such as defense.
Excellent. So I'm going to give everybody 30 seconds just as closing comments. Go ahead and give your response.
Oh, well, I was just going to say on that point of infantry, I mean, it seems to me that one of the lessons of the Ukraine war is that infantry is absolutely crucial, and, maybe always will be. But I will say, I did see just happened to see a video yesterday that sort of blew my mind. That, I tend to focus on naval AI applications, but this one was I think it was a Chinese sort of large quadcopter that then landed and released one of these dog drones. And again, I don't focus on those particular capabilities, but it does seem to me that for a Taiwan scenario, that would be a pretty interesting combination. And I dare say, I think, in the West we may be having deep inhibitions about that, but China may not, and I think we'd better consider that. On the other hand, and my final comment would be, and I'll make this case tomorrow, but it seems to me that this area of AI, we definitely need to consider crisis management, how that's impacted by AI, but also, it's time even to use that word from a long time ago, arms control, and it's gone way out of fashion, but it seems to me that in AI, we need to begin to grapple with that as well. And China, I will say, has put out some feelers there. So, I think at a minimum, we have to make some consideration of that. Whether we want to try to enter some agreements is uncertain, but thank you.
Just closing comments.
Thank you. I would just say, follow your curiosity and use as much creativity, bring it to bear when you're thinking through the future of conflict. If you want to play video games, read graphic novels and science fiction to learn about the future of war, you have my blessing and permission.
Lyle, do you have any last comment? Just closing comments?
Oh, well, I would just, I feel like I've said what I wanted to say, but I guess I would a small plug for those interested in regional studies. You know, study your languages. We need a lot of people knowledgeable about China, so please have a lot of advice along those lines. But I'm incredibly impressed by this institution. It's not the first time, and you know, keep studying hard, and hope to see you again.
Study history. In my 20 plus years writing about the Defense Department, I've always been impressed by what a learning institution it is, but it's also a forgetting institution. And when we look at the war in Ukraine, we see lessons from Iraq, from Afghanistan, from the Vietnam War. I won't even, my colleagues are much better at predicting the future than me, but I see so many things that you can learn from the past that can be applied to the future.
Yes, I concur with that. Study history, but also study your adversaries, your current and our potential adversaries, because you know, it's that old saw of, you know, looking beyond the edge of your plate. Is you have to, you know, kind of figure out. It's easy to, and it's a mistake that we've made in the past before. You know, this waltzing into a country and thinking that they will act like us if they just have the right, you know, incentives or the right circumstances. But the thing is that, and speaking from somebody who's from a different culture, there are things to everyone's culture that make them, that influence how they fight wars, how they see their opponents, how they treat things like ethics in combat, and what technology to use, and whether they have compunctions about it, and what kind of, you know, reservations they would have. Learn your adversaries. I'm not saying enemies, because, you know, the global situation changes with almost every decade. I mean, it's just constantly in flux, and people that we thought were our allies ended up not being, and people that were, you know, that we were unfriendly with. I mean, speaking as a German, yeah, you know, it's you know, it can turn into your best allies, but you have to know how the other side thinks. You have to be able to understand why they do what they do and how they feel. So learn their history, learn their language if you can, and you know, whether it's Russian, Chinese, whatever, and this is like, I too am really bad with long-term predictions in fiction. We writers tend to, what I have what I call the fancy airship syndrome. There was this collection of postcards in 1900 that depicted how they were asking people, like writers, how do you see the world in 2000? And they were putting out postcards with like, oh, the world in 2000 from the viewpoint of somebody who grows up in the Victorian age. And it's all just Victorian age stuff. It's just prettied up. Like the fireman with the fire hose has like a little helicopter hat so he can fly right up to the fire, but he's still dressed Victorian style, and he's got a water tank on his back. Like there's a tendency to not think ahead far enough when it comes to predicting future development, and most of us writers are terrible at that. It's like some of us get lucky, and then they're like, oh, he's a visionary. No, I just got lucky. But yeah, get into the heads of the people that are most likely to be our opponents. You know, learn their culture, learn their language, and figure them out, because, you know, sooner or later it's going to help you. You know, maybe not in open conflict, but definitely in preventing future conflict.
Excellent. All right, so that completes our panel for today. I just want to give you one piece of advice of 32 years of experience. Embrace the time you have at Norwich, learn as much as you can, and then embrace your time in service. I will tell you that my Army career was the best experience of my life, and it allowed me to do so much and so many different things to set me up for the future, which is where I'm at today. And so, though it may not pay the best dollars at the start, it will set you up for a commercial career, a long government service career, or a military career. And so just embrace that service and do the best, and take advantage of all the services that the military offers you. Free education, go to law school, go to medical school. All of those are available to you as you join the service and commissioned officer. So I wish you the best of luck as future officers in the Army, the Marine Corps, the Navy, and the Air Force, and the Coast Guard. And I'm very happy with the future of our force with you in that. So thank you so much. Cadet Colonel, I turn the Corps back over to you.
Again, thank you to all the panelists up here. Really appreciate your insight. And at this time, the Corps is dismissed. Thank you.